A visit to the medieval doctor is early morning, and the sun hasn't quite reached the stone streets of your small medieval town. You wake in a narrow bed stuffed with straw, wrapped in a coarse wool blanket that smells faintly of smoke and time. Your head is heavy. Your joints are warm. Something isn't right, but you don't expect it to be. Most mornings are a little wrong in some way or another. You pull on a tunic, feel the cold floor beneath your feet, and make the slow, deliberate walk to the apothecary. Not in a hurry, because no one is. Because illness in these times is not an emergency. It's simply expected. The door to the physician's quarters creaks open on swollen hinges. Inside it is dark except for the soft flicker of a candle and that faint, familiar smell. Vinegar, mostly. Dried herbs. A little mold, dust, and something damp that you can't name but always seems to cling to stone walls in places like this. The air is still. It wraps around you like the wool blanket, like the thick silence of the sick room. There's no desk. Not really. Just a wooden table, stained with things. The physician is here, or maybe an apothecary, or perhaps a barber. In truth, titles blur. What matters is that he has remedies, and you don't. He nods at you, slowly. You say what hurts. Your stomach, or your chest, or your shoulder that won't stop twitching. You try to describe it, but it doesn't matter much. He will diagnose. You the same way as everyone else. With his eyes. With his nose. And with a little glass flask, which he gestures for now, politely, almost with reverence. You understand. You take the flask behind the cloth screen, and you fill it with your urine. That's the first step. He holds it up to the light, what little light there is. The candle wobbles slightly in a draft, and the yellow liquid glows amber in the glass. Turns it, examines it, looks for cloudiness, color, bits dot, and maybe, depending on his schooling, he'll sip it. Just a little dot, it is quiet while he considers. You look around the room. On one shelf, dried herbs hang in little bunches. Rosemary. Sage, nettle. On another, small clay pots sealed with wax, labeled with symbols you don't read. There is a bowl with what appears to be dried frog skins, and something wrapped in cloth that looks like an antler. There's always a mortar and pestle. Always. And in this room, he is using it now. He grinds something slowly. Rhythmically, with a dull scrape that seems to echo. Not urgently. Just with determination. Perhaps it is rosemary, perhaps dried lizard. It doesn't matter. It is the sound that comforts. Somewhere beneath your ribs, something still aches. But now you are watching him work, and it feels as though that might be enough. The physician sets the urine aside and refers to a parchment. A chart, perhaps. A comparison of colors? Or maybe the stars. You don't know. He says you may have an imbalance. Most people do. He believes it may be your phlegm. Or perhaps black bile. There are 4 humors in the body, he explains, though you've heard it many times before. Blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and you must have too much of one. Or not enough of another. He taps his lip, thoughtfully. Then walks to the shelf and pulls down a jar sealed with twine. He unties it carefully, like a priest preparing a relic. Inside is a powder. Ground to fineness? It smells of cloves. Or maybe dirt dot. He adds a pinch of it to a small bowl of wine. You are to drink it slowly, he says, before bed. Then come back in 3 days. If it hasn't helped, he may recommend bloodletting. He says it very gently, dot, as though he's offering tea. You nod. Of course. That makes sense. That's what's done. You take the wine mixture and thank him, and you step back out into the air, which is bright now. The street is muddy from last night's rain. A dog barks in the distance. A wheel creaks. The smell of vinegar still clings to your hair. That evening, by candlelight, you sit on your cot and sip the wine as instructed. It is sour. You try not to wonder what was in it. Your stomach still hurts, but it is quieter now. Maybe it's the wine. Or the thought of care. Or the knowledge that someone looked at your urine and said something definite, even if it wasn't clear. You lie back. Close your eyes, Somewhere you imagine the doctor is still grinding something in that bowl. A powder, a paste, a potion. Always preparing. Always listening for imbalanced dot in the morning. You will return if things are worse, or if they are better, or if they are the same dot and maybe next time. It will be time for leeches. The four humors were everything. There's something reassuring about theory that explains everything dot in the soft dimness of the physician's chamber, where candles flicker behind wax-dappled glass and the scent of crushed. Fennel hangs in the air like the breath of a forest, long forgotten. There's a quiet kind of certainty. Not in the cures, though. Those are rarely certain. But in the theory. The grand, slow-moving theory that says your entire body, from your sore shoulder to your melancholy thoughts, from a rash to a dream, can be explained by four very particular fluids. They're called the humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. They sound unpleasant, because they are, but they are not feared. They are accepted like weather or taxes or the way your knees ache when it rains. They are simply the parts of you that matter, the materials from which your body is composed, and more importantly, the explanation for almost everything that goes wrong. The physician does not need to speak quickly. He doesn't need to rush toward diagnosis or deliver a name for your illness. In truth, names aren't very helpful. What matters is balance, or rather, the lack of it. You have too much blood, perhaps, or not enough black bile. Maybe the phlegm has risen, like mist in a valley. Maybe your yellow bile has gone stagnant and needs to be stirred with pepper and fasting. The point is, something is out of proportion. The physician, like an alchemist of the flesh, is there to notice which element is speaking too loudly and find a way to hush it. This is how medicine works. In these days of stone hearths and thatched roofs, the body is a bowl. The humors are ladled into it, unevenly, at birth. And life, with its meals and moods and moon cycles, stirs them into disorder. No one seems to think this is strange. Imagine, for a moment, sitting in a wooden chair, carved, roughly from local ash, while a physician with a slow, patient voice asks you questions about your sleep, your dreams, the color of your stools, whether you've been weeping more than usual, whether your appetite has wandered. These are not idle curiosities. They are signals of excess or deficiency. Are you cold and sluggish? Likely too much phlegm? Are you irritable and dry of skin? Yellow bile, clearly. Do you bruise easily and feel sentimental at sunset? The black bile has risen again. You are not embarrassed. This is simply how the body works. Everyone knows someone who has been bled to rebalance their excess blood. Everyone has tasted a bitter root to cool an overabundance of heat. It is common to wear warming herbs in winter, cooling ones in spring, and to avoid lettuce altogether if you're prone to melancholy. Children are said to be full of blood, excitable and ruddy. The elderly are considered filled with phlegm, pale. Men are warm and dry. Women, moist and cool. Everything fits somewhere. The world itself, it is believed, is made in similar ways. The seasons, the planets, the very soil. Summer is hot and wet, like blood. Winter is cold and wet, like phlegm. The humors run through everything, and to live well is to live in harmony with them, or at least to be treated when they stray. There are charts, drawn by careful hands illustrating which foods encourage which humors. Garlic, for instance, is heating, good for the cold, but too much might inflame the blood. Fish are moist and cooling, fine for those with yellow bile, but unwise for the phlegmatic. Even the motions have their places. Laughter is a sign of sanguine blood. Rage belongs to the choleric bile. Sadness is for melancholics, black bile, rising like a fog in the mind. Love might be any of them, depending on how it's going. The physician may not know the names of bacteria or the shapes of cells, but he knows the seasons of the body. He reads your pulse with 2 fingers and a long silence. He watches your eyes, your skin, your gestures. Perhaps he'll touch your tongue or weigh your breath in the quiet between questions. Then he will say, almost gently, what you already knew. You are out of sorts, a little too warm, or too damp, or too full, and so he will recommend something to draw it out of you, often. That something is bloodletting. We'll talk about that more in the next part, but for now, just know that to balance the humors is to let things go. A small incision in the arm. A cup of herbs boiled in honeyed wine. A purge if things are particularly bad. The use of enemas is common and often described without much flourish. Everyone accepts that sometimes to feel better, one must expel something. These treatments are neither dramatic nor painful, at least not in how they are spoken about. They are simply necessary. The slow, sensible course of action, much like mending a torn hem or clearing out the chimney. You are a vessel, and the contents must be adjusted. The belief in the humors will endure for centuries. It will spread through monasteries and markets, passed down in dusty manuscripts in quiet, one-on-one explanations by traveling doctors. It will cross borders and faiths. A theory elegant enough to be flexible, broad enough to seem wise, and people will continue to be confused by their fevers and their sadness and their aching joints. But they will also be comforted, because someone, a man in robes, or a woman with a mortar and pestle, will always be ready to say, "Ah, yes, I see it. Your blood is too hot, or your bile has sunk," and that is something, it's not a cure. Exactly. But it's a reason, and in these times, reasons are hard to come by. Now you lie in bed, again, wrapped in the same wool blanket. It smells faintly of garlic and tallow. The wind outside is sharp, and you wonder if the cold is creeping into your humors, turning phlegm to ice. You tuck the blanket closer around your chin and imagine little bowls of fluid inside you, shifting like wine in a cup. You think about the warm broth you had for supper, and whether it soothed your yellow bile or stirred your blood. You don't know, but the thought itself is soothing. You are part of a system. A whole wet human system where even your coughing means something. The candle is nearly burned down. The flame dances slowly now, tired from the long day. The air smells of rosemary, leeches and bloodletting. The sound of dripping water echoes softly against stone. Somewhere nearby, a bucket is half full, and the roof above it sighs with age. The room is dim, not from lack of sunlight, but by choice. Illness seems quieter in the dark, more manageable. Light only reminds people of how pale they've become. You lie still beneath a woolen blanket that smells faintly of lanolin and damp wood smoke. Your limbs are heavy. The physician is moving quietly nearby, sorting small bundles of cloth, his fingers gentle, as though he's folding linens for a sleeping child. He tells you it's time to relieve you of the weight that clogs your body. The heat, the thickness, the humors that churn too forcefully in your veins. You are too full of blood, he says. Or perhaps your blood is too lively. It pulses too fast or in the wrong direction or just at the wrong season. Perhaps your dreams have been too strange. Perhaps your eyes are red. Whatever the reason, the answer is the same. A little less blood will bring you back into balance, and so the bowls are brought out. There's nothing alarming about them. They are shallow and made of pewter or ceramic, depending on the wealth of the physician. They are placed beside the bed on a small wooden stand, near a bundle of linen strips for wrapping. There's no hurry. Bleeding is not an emergency treatment. It is not a last resort. It is routine, quiet, nearly ceremonial. A gentle releasing of that which is simply too much. Sometimes the physician uses a lancet, a small blade with a very sharp point. He will tie a strip of cloth around your arm, just above the elbow, and wait for the veins to rise. He watches them calmly. Then he pierces one with such precision you barely feel it. A thin stream of red begins to gather, and you lie still as it falls, drop by drop, into the waiting bowl dot. No one speaks during this part. The blood pools slowly, and the room is silent but for your breath and the whisper of fabric as the physician adjusts your arm. You watch the bowl fill, or perhaps you don't. Some people find it calming. Others turn their heads and think of water or wool or the way the fire crackles at night. You're not in pain. Only a little colder than before. But today, there is no blade. Today, it will be the leeches. From a small clay pot, the physician lifts a cloth. Beneath it, in a bit of moist moss, lie several small creatures. Dark, slick, coiled like living, camas. They move sluggishly at first, disturbed by light and air, but gradually they awaken, stretching and curling with mindless hunger. These are medical leeches, carefully harvested from the shallow edges of certain ponds, collected by hand or by calf, sometimes using the legs of young apprentices who wade bare into the muddy water until the animals latch on. The leeches are then gently removed, cleaned, and kept in cool, damp containers. They are valued, cared for, named in some cases. Your physician selects one, or perhaps two, with care. He places them upon your skin, not in haste, not with ceremony, but with a calm familiarity, behind your ear, perhaps, or on the inside of your elbow, where the skin is thin and pale. The leeches do not hesitate. They attach with a firmness that feels more curious than painful, like a thumb pressed gently into dough. And then they feed. Their bodies begin to swell, slowly, steadily, as your blood fills them. You lie still, because movement might cause them to release too early. The physician sits nearby, sipping something warm, maybe murmuring a short prayer, or simply watching the candlelight flicker on the wall. The room is quiet. The leeches continue. This is not a quick process. The bleeding may last 30 minutes or longer, but there is no discomfort, only the strange knowledge that your blood is being drawn out in such an old, precise way. It is not just blood. It is imbalance being corrected. Pressure being relieved. Disease being drained. When the leeches are full, they drop away, plump and red, like little wineskins. They are gently returned to the moss, where they will digest for weeks. They are not reused until their hunger returns. You, meanwhile, are cleaned and wrapped in a bit of cloth, not too tight, so the blood may still trickle a little longer. That's considered best. A slow finish. You are lightheaded. That is expected. A bowl of broth will be brought soon, or a bit of wine watered down. You are to rest. Sleep, preferably. That is where the healing happens. Sometimes the bloodletting is done from the ankles or the neck. Sometimes more aggressive forms are used. A cupping glass heated and placed on the skin to draw blood through the pores. Sometimes leeches are applied to the temples or inside the mouth. Each location corresponds to an ailment. Headache, behind the ears. Cough, the chest. Swelling in the legs, the calves. Nothing is random. Everything has its place, even your blood. Outside, the wind rustles the thatch on the roof. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster has begun its confusion, crowing long before dawn. You do not mind. You are too tired. Your body feels quiet, as though some invisible pressure has been released, like steam from a tightly sealed pot. You do not know if you are better, but you feel emptier, and that is something. The physician will check on you in the morning. He may recommend a cooling herb, or a bit of honey steeped with crushed poppy. You may be bled again in a week if your complexion doesn't return, if your dreams remain disturbed, or if your pulse still feels too quick beneath the fingers. But for now, the leeches sleep in their moss. You sleep in your bed, and the bowl of your body is just a little less full than before. Tree panning. Yes, that's skull drilling. The room is unusually quiet today. Not just the quiet of candles burning low, or distant footsteps fading into the stone hallway, but a quieter quiet, the kind that settles low into the chest. A stillness not born of peace, exactly, but of concentration, of acceptance, of something unusual, done very slowly and very seriously. Beneath the smooth patience of practiced hands, you are not lying in the physician's ordinary chair. Today, you are on a padded bench angled slightly upward, a soft roll of wool beneath your neck. There is a cloth draped loosely over your shoulders. The light is softer than usual. Not dim, just gentled, filtered through a thin bit of parchment stretched across the window. You smell lavender oil and beeswax, and beneath it, the familiar mineral scent of steel. You know what is about to happen. You've known for days. The physician explained it gently. The others in the village said they'd heard of it being done before, and not just in distant lands, but here, on people you've spoken to, even laughed with. People who walked away afterward and said they felt a bit lighter. You feel pressure. In your head, you have for weeks an ache behind the eyes, a heaviness, strange thoughts, dreams that do not belong to you. The physician believes it is a buildup of spirits, of vapors, of black bile, or simply of pressure itself. Something caught behind the bone that needs to be let out. Not with herbs, not with leeches, but through the skull. And so today you will be drilled. It is called trepanning, or sometimes trephination. A hole made carefully in the skull, not with force, not with haste, but with slow, deliberate turns of a small, sharp instrument. The goal is not to harm the brain. Heavens no. The brain is to be untouched. The hole is only in the outer bone, like opening a window. To let something out, or in some cases to let something wholly in, the tool is shaped like a tiny auger, not unlike the one used for wood, but finer, and often handmade. The physician holds it delicately, his fingers practiced, his breath steady. He speaks softly to you as he prepares not to distract, but to anchor. His words are slow, full of calm phrases and gentle reminders that this has been done for centuries. Since the ancients, since the Greeks, even since before parchment and ink. He places a warm cloth against your temple. It smells of thyme and wine. Then, with quiet ceremony, he marks the spot where the skull will open. You do not expect to feel the cutting, and you don't, not quite. The preparation included wine and herbs, and perhaps the juice of poppy or wild lettuce. Your senses are softened. Your body feels distant. The tool begins its gentle spinning, its whispering motion, and you close your eyes. What you feel, if anything, is not pain. It is pressure. A slow vibration humming against the core of you, like the low drone of a spinning wheel. The physician pauses often, wipes the area, checks your breath. He says nothing is wrong. He says you are doing well. The bone thins. Bit by bit, it may take an hour. Or longer. No one is counting. There is no clock. The candle burns steadily, its wax making a slow tear down the iron holder. Outside, a bird sings in the distance. Not cheerfully, not brightly. Just there, like everything else, and then, without drama, the drill stops. The physician leans close, inspecting the hole, not quite round, but clean. No bone dust remains. The dura, that pale lining that protects the brain, is left intact. The window is open, but the house is safe. He does not touch the brain. He never intended to. You lie still. He does not rush to cover the hole. He lets it breathe just for a moment. Then he applies a poultice, something cooling, with crushed violet leaves and linen soaked in rose water. He wraps your head gently, murmuring phrases meant to soothe, and reminds you that you will rest now, and that the bad vapors will leave, the madness will settle, the headache will ease, and perhaps they will. Sometimes they do. Trepanning is used for many things, for pain, for epilepsy, for head wounds, and sometimes for thoughts that seem too loud or too sorrowful. No one quite agrees on the reason it works, but it has been done since the earliest days of medicine in cultures all over the world. Skulls from hundreds, even thousands of years ago have been found with small, healed holes, proof that the patients often lived, some with one opening, some with several. The bone, astonishingly, sometimes grows back, not completely, but enough to mark the passing of time that it is not considered madness to undergo it. It is not even strange. It is simply what is done. When nothing else has worked, and when something must be released, you sleep now. The ache behind your eyes is gone. Or perhaps it's only waiting, but for now, the absence is real enough. Your head is heavy with bandages, but your thoughts are slower. You can feel the breeze of the evening through the window. The stars are out, though you cannot see them. You imagine them anyway, cold and flickering, like small holes in the sky. You think of the bone that once sealed your mind away from the world, and the hole that now lets the world in or something out. You will be watched through the night. A basin will be nearby, in case you're sick. Your meals will be soft, your bed warmed with stones. The physician will return in the morning, and again the next day and the day after. The bandage will be changed, the wound kept clean. It may even be packed with wool or moss, not to fill the hole, but to protect it. Like stuffing in a quiet drawer, you're not frightened. You are lighter and very tired urine tells. All the flask is warm in your hands, and you feel the faintest shimmer of it. Though not enough to stop you from carrying it forward, it's just part of the process. A small lidded glass vessel, shaped like a rounded bulb with a long neck, designed for one purpose and one purpose only, to hold your urine. You do not question this. No one does. Urine, after all, is the mirror of the body. It reflects what lies inside, the humors, the heat, the dampness of your soul. And so, when something feels wrong, the first thing to offer is yourself in liquid form, warm and honest, in a bottle. The physician takes it without judgment, his face unreadable in the way only deeply thoughtful people manage to be. He holds the vessel up toward the faint shaft of morning light that slips through the parchment-covered window. The golden color glows softly in the neck of the flask, swirling gently as he turns it. He does not speak for some time. You are used. To this silence by now, it is not disapproval. It is study. He looks for cloudiness, for sediment, for brightness, for foam. All of it means something. If the urine clings to the side of the glass, it may suggest excess phlegm. If it settles heavily, it could be a sign of melancholy. If it sparkles, and some swore it did, the body might be fighting off invisible spirits. There are charts for this. You've seen them, hung on the walls of certain apothecaries, painted with care the same way a chapel might depict saints. Rows and rows of small flasks, each filled with a different hue, from the pale yellow of spring hay to the deep ruddy brown of old iron. Each shade is labeled sanguine, choleric, phlegmatic, melancholic. Some are tinged with grain, some are milky, some strangely blue. There is even a flask shown as black, though no one seems sure if this has ever truly been seen, or if it's a warning of something worse than illness. The physician today sets your flask gently on the table beside him, next to a small spoon made of pewter. He does not reach for it yet. You've heard that some do that tasting the urine is considered the height of diagnostic skill, a test of the tongue, a refined balance, a sip no larger than that of communion wine, taken in deep concentration, not for judgment, but for clarity. Does it taste sweet, which might mean the body is leaking sugar? Does it taste sharp, which suggests heat? Or thick, which hints at stagnation? There are those who say it is the only true way to know what lies beneath the surface. But your physician only squints at it a moment longer, then nods to himself and begins to write. His writing is slow, each letter drawn with quiet care, as if the words themselves could affect your condition. He records your name, the day, the moon's phase, and the condition of the urine in precise but patient Latin. His ink is made from crushed oak galls, and it smells faintly sour. You glance around the room as he continues. On the wall beside the chart, there's a shelf filled with flasks, empty now, but lined in a way that suggests each has its place. Some are slightly green from age. One appears to still contain a faint ring of residue at the bottom, like a memory that refuses to be scrubbed away. Doubt is strange. You think how natural this all feels. The act of handing over your body in a bottle, watching someone read it like tea leaves. as though your liquid self contains not only your disease, but your temperament, your mood, your fate. But here, in the low light of a stone room with soot, on the beams and rosemary hanging from the lintel, it feels almost elegant. The idea that your body is always speaking, and someone has simply learned how to listen. The physician clears his throat softly and tells you, without alarm, that your urine is slightly thick. The color is leaning toward orange, and the scent faintly musky. He says this is common in late summer. You may be retaining too much yellow bile. Perhaps you've eaten too many figs. Perhaps your liver is sluggish. Perhaps your dreams have been too warm. In any case, he recommends a cooling draft. Something brewed from violet, mint and lettuce, steeped in spring water, taken before breakfast. No need to worry. You nod. Of course, as you rise to leave, he returns the flask to you. And you carry it carefully back through the door and down the path, as one might carry any delicate truth. You pour it out behind the cottage, where the herbs grow thick and unbothered. The soil accepts it without comment. Back in bed. You lie awake longer than usual, watching the ceiling darken with the hour. You think about the fluidity of the body, how easily it gives up its secrets. You remember the way the urine swirled. In the glass like wine, how seriously it was regarded, how gently he turned it. You wonder what else your body might say, if it could speak more directly. But then, again, perhaps it already does dot the use of animal parts it begins, as so many things do, with a pinch of powder. The room smells of dried mint and smoke, as it often does, though today there's something else beneath it, a faint, sweet sour. Edge like old feathers or damp fur. The physician is working slowly, as always, hunched over the table with a small knife in one hand and a mortar in the other. You watch from the wooden bench, wrapped in the same woolen blanket you've sat in all week. There is no great urgency. Your stomach has been uneasy, your joints stiff, but nothing alarming. Still, he insists the bile is stirring, and something must be done. He pulls out a bundle wrapped in waxed cloth and opens it as if unveiling something sacred. Inside, a dry, pale structure, too knobby to be wood and too light to be bone. He explains with quiet pride that it is antler ground fine over days, stored in a cool place, and taken in small doses with warm ale. It strengthens the blood, he says, and soothes the liver. The idea that a deer's horn might cure a human's heat is not questioned. It simply makes a kind of sense. The wildness of the animal, distilled into dust, absorbed into the human. Like one creature handing its strength to another across the centuries. You are not surprised. This is how most things work in medicine now. Nature speaks in symbols, and the body answers. What the deer knows, you might borrow. What the lizard clings to, you might imitate. There are powdered scales from snakes, dried hearts of frogs, spider webs kept neatly in little linen packets and stored like herbs. Everything is something. Everything might help. A bat's wing, boiled and strained, is good for sleep. A crushed snail shell cools the blood. Fat from a goose, when rubbed into the solace of the feet, calms a dry cough, or so the apothecary's assistant insists. Even owl brains have been used, mashed, and stirred into red wine to soothe convulsions of the mind. You asked once why. That was considered helpful, and the physician looked at you with a slight tilt of the head and said, very plainly, because owls are wise. You nodded, of course. That makes sense that the strange part is not the ingredients themselves, but how ordinary they feel. These are not spells or tricks. These are simply the tools available, tucked between jars of rosemary and small cakes of honeyed. Clay. One shelf contains dried rose hips. The next, dried beetles. The two are not treated so differently. They are chosen, prepared, labeled in the same hand. All that matters is the effect. If it works, or seems to, then it stays. There is even a long scroll in the physician's casebook, listing combinations that once helped someone's cousin or mother or goat. Mouse fat with mint, toad skin dried under the full moon, the ash of a black feather mixed with barley meal. Most of these things aren't questioned because Quite simply, there aren't better options. And because the boundary between the natural and the magical is thin here, soft, like old linen. Things just are, and always have been. You're given your dose, just a pinch, stirred into the warm ale. The taste is not pleasant, but you've had worse. It is earthy, a little gritty, with a faint bitterness like bark. You drink it slowly, while the fire crackles. The physician watches you as if you were a weather vane, waiting for the wind to shift. Afterward, he says nothing. Only writes something in the margin of his notebook, and returns to grinding something else in the mortar. A different powder, paler and very faintly green. He does not say what it is. You do not ask. There's trust between the two of you. Now, the kind that grows between people who've shared strange remedies and early mornings dot as the hours pass. You feel a little lighter, your stomach less rebellious. You can't say it was the antler or the warmth of the drink or the quiet knowledge that something was done. But something has changed, if only slightly. Your limbs are looser, your breath deeper. You doze in the chair while the physician grinds something behind you. You think it might be dried lizard skin this time. The smell is different, a little sharper. Not unpleasant. Just specific dot later that night, in bed. You think about the animals that make their way into these rooms, not alive, but in pieces, dried and ground and folded into bread or soaked in vinegar or hidden in pouches. You wonder if they would be proud, or offended, or simply amused. You imagine the owl blinking slowly in the dark, unaware that its brain has become a wine additive. You imagine the deer galloping and noble, its antlers one day turned into the fine dust sitting now in your stomach. You imagine the physician, years from now, teaching someone younger how to slice dried bat wing into manageable flakes. And that person asking, but why? And the physician answering, because it works, or once did, or once seemed to. Pustules, poultices, and pig fat. The treatment begins with a paste. It usually does. Not a tidy pill or a crisp cloth bandage, but something thick and wet hand mixed in a wooden bowl with a spoon that still smells of last week's remedy. The physician, or perhaps his apprentice, leans over the bowl in the glow of a small fire, adding things without measurement, trusting memory, texture, instinct. A scoop of crushed garlic, a spoonful of goose grease, a smear of old honey, and this time a pinch of dried mustard seeds. There's no precise recipe. It depends on the season, the weather, the patient's complexion, and what is available in the cupboard. If the mixture is too thick, a little warm wine is added. If too runny, stale breadcrumbs will bind it. The goal is not taste and not elegance, but something thick enough to cling to a wound and stubborn enough to stay there. You sit quietly, not expecting to be comfortable. The sore on your leg is red and puffed like overripe fruit, hot to the touch and faintly weeping. It has been there for days, perhaps longer. You tried herbs, tried rest, tried ignoring it. But now it pulses, as though remembering something on your behalf. And the physician says it is time to draw the badness out. Not cut it open yet, but coax it like it seemed from a pot. This is where the poultice comes in. A warm lump of effort and scent and slow conviction pressed directly onto the angry skin and left to do its mysterious work. The room smells like damp wool, fermented honey, and pig fat. Not unpleasant, but rich in a way that lingers on the tongue. The physician kneads the poultice with both hands now, murmuring slightly under his breath, perhaps reciting the order of ingredients, or perhaps simply humming to the rhythm of his own work. He does not wear gloves, of course. His nails are stained dark with herbs, his skin dry from countless hand washings in wine and vinegar. He does not seem rushed. Poultices cannot be rushed. They must be patient, because the body is stubborn, and does not like to give up its humors all at once. When it is ready, he carries the bowl to you with both hands, as though it were something holy. The mixture inside is greenish-brown, shiny in some places, matte in others, steaming faintly. He uses a clean rag to scoop it up and shape it, folding the poultice like a warm dumpling, then laying it gently across the sore. The heat is startling at first, then oddly soothing. It doesn't hurt exactly, it presses, like the hand of someone who knows just where to hold. You exhale, the soreness throbs, and then begins to settle. He ties the poultice in place with a long strip of linen, winding it twice around your leg, knotting it without pulling too tight. It will stay for hours, possibly all night. He may add more paste later, or replace it with another made from something stronger, perhaps clay mixed with sheep dung. Yes, that one is pungent, but very effective. There's no shame in the ingredients. No one flinches at the mention of pig fat or moldy bread or mashed figs fermented in goat milk. These things are natural, known, close at hand. Some poultices use barley and beer, others cow dung and ash, others the yolk of an old egg beaten with vinegar. One patient claimed her boil burst only after applying a poultice made from onion, garlic, and the fat of a black cat. The physician did not ask questions. He only nodded and made a note. Healing is mysterious. The body hides its illness, and sometimes it must be tricked or coaxed or made to sweat it out through the skin where it can be wiped away. Poultices are the hands that draw the illness upward, like sap in spring. You lie back against the wall, your leg wrapped and warm, the scent of the poultice curling softly into the folds of the blanket. It is strange how comforting it is, how this mess of kitchen scraps and sticky oils can make the body feel tended to. You do not know if it will work. No one truly does. But you know that the swelling has stopped for now. That someone has seen your wound and taken it seriously. That something living has been applied to something hurting. And sometimes that's enough. The rest can be left to time, to sleep, to whatever gods oversee the business of healing. There are poultices for nearly everything. For fever, rose petals cooled in milk and laid across the chest. For earaches, mashed leeks stuffed into wool and held behind the ear with a strip of cloth. For broken skin, beeswax, honey, and soot. For ulcers that refuse to close, mashed turnip, vinegar, and some say a sliver of church candle. Each poultice has a story, and each has been passed down not in books, but in murmured instructions between mothers, monks, and midwives. The best ones are remembered by smell: sharp mustard, warm lard, the sour tang of fermented grain. They linger in rooms long after the wounds have gone. Later that night, the physician returns to check your bandage. He unties it with care, using the corner of a cloth to lift the edge and fold it back. The poultice has darkened slightly, and the skin beneath it looks less angry, less glossy with pain. He grunts softly in approval, then applies a fresh layer. This one made with boiled cabbage and a pinch of something that looks like ash. He does not explain the change, and you do not ask. The treatment has entered its own rhythm now, and you have joined it. Not as a patient, but as a participant in something older than understanding. You feel your body settle around it. You feel your leg accepting the heat, the weight, the weird comfort of something handmade and slightly smelly. You begin to drift. The fire has burned low. The light is soft. The scent of herbs and fat is now familiar, almost tender. You think, before sleep takes you, of the hundreds of others who have lain in this room, or one like it, with a poultice, strapped to some aching limb. You think of their relief, or their doubt, or the simple fact that someone cared enough to mix something warm and press it gently to the skin. It is not a miracle, it is not modern, but it is real. And tonight it is yours. Barber surgeons, and the bucket the chair is wooden, worn smooth by years of sitting, slightly tilted from the floor's uneven stone. You climb into it carefully, guided by the hand of the man they call the barber surgeon, not a doctor, and not just a barber, but something in between, something oddly specific to this time and place. His hands are strong, but not hurried. His eyes are alert, but not cold. There's a long, shallow basin at his side, with water that smells faintly of soap and old iron. He nods to you gently and begins to prepare his things. Scissors, razors, Bandages, saws, all laid out in a line on a folded cloth beside the fire. Nothing is shiny. Everything is dulled from use, but clean in the way things are when scrubbed daily and boiling. Water and wiped down with alcohol made from old grapes and stronger prayers. He begins with your beard. This is always the beginning, even if the problem is your leg. The face must be clean, the head shaved, the edges trimmed. He lathers the soap slowly, swirling it in a little bowl with a stiff bristled brush. And the scent rises like comfort. Lanolin, herbs, a little tallow. The foam is warm on your skin. The blade is cold. He scrapes in short, confident strokes, and you watch a single spider dangle from the beams above you. This is not the dramatic beginning of surgery as you might imagine it. It is quiet, ritualized, almost soft. The shave is not for show. It is to prepare, to bring order, to allow the healing to begin with something clean outside the doorway. The red and white striped pole leans at a sleepy angle. The cloth around it is soaked through, not with paint, but with blood, originally. Centuries ago, that spiral was the real thing. Twisted rags hung out to dry after leechings and lancings and amputations. The pole became a sign. If you needed cutting, go here. If you needed draining, wrapping, or pulling of teeth, this was the place. Surgery did not belong to universities or scholars, but to men with steady hands and wooden chairs. And so the pole stayed, turning slowly in the breeze, red for blood, white for bandage. The silent symbol of strange mercy. After the shave, he rinses your face and sets to work on your foot. You injured it weeks ago, perhaps on a stone step, perhaps while climbing the slope behind your cottage. It swelled, bruised, turned strange colors. Someone suggested leeches. Someone else suggested prayer. Eventually, you were sent here. To the barber surgeon who looked at it, nodded, and said, "We'll have to open it, not cruelly, not with dread. Just the way one might say, we'll need more water." He unwraps the linen and examines the foot again now, in the flickering firelight. It is puffy, discolored, and very warm to the touch. He sighs softly and reaches for the knife. You do not watch. You stare at the bucket beside the chair. A large one, metal, dented at the rim. It is empty now, but not for long. It has held many things: blood, bone, discarded dressings, teeth. It is ordinary, almost domestic in its plainness. There is a cloth inside it, damp and pink. The blade goes in. It is sharp, but not swift. The surgeon works slowly, carefully, letting the wound open with dignity, letting the fluid drain in its own time. There is no shouting, no gagging, no wide-eyed panic. Only breath and pressure and the sound of wet cloth being pressed into a basin. You are given a small cup of something warm, a mulled wine perhaps, not to numb the pain, but to distract the mind, the barber surgeon murmurs to himself. The assistant brings fresh bandages. The room is still. Once the wound is clean, he packs it gently with wool soaked in wine and honey. Then he wraps it tightly with a strip of linen that once belonged to a pillowcase. Every material has a second use here. Every object has seen many lives. The wool is coarse, but clean. The wine stings a little. The honey smells faintly of apples. The surgeon nods in satisfaction, then picks up the basin and empties it into the larger bucket. The liquid hits with a soft splash. He wipes the blade on his apron, then places it back on the cloth. The assistant hands you another cup, this one cooler, herbal, brewed for calm. The bandage will stay on for 2 days, he says. Then it will be removed, repacked, and rewrapped. Healing is not a single act. It is a ritual of repetition done in half-light, in quiet rooms, with sharp tools and wool. You stay in the chair for a while after that. The pain is real, but distant. The bandage is snug. The barber surgeon hums softly while he sharpens his razor on a leather strop. Someone else enters, an old man with a swollen jaw, and sits across the room. No one Speaks. The air is heavy with rosemary smoke and damp cloth. Somewhere a pot is boiling. The pole outside turns a little in the breeze. The red strip has dried to brown. The white strip is speckled. It's just a sign now. It means here we cut kindly. In time, the barber surgeon comes back to check. Your pulse, not with fingers to the wrist, but with a long look at your face. He nods again. You may rest now. The worst is done. In the days to come, there may be more draining, more packing, more wrapping. If the wound smells strange, you must return. If it stays dry, you are healing. There is no chart, no scan, no official discharge, just the slow, ancient rhythm of observation and hope. He pats your shoulder once, gently, with a hand that has held hundreds of wounds, cut dozens of limbs, shaved hundreds of beards. He is not a physician, but he is enough. Later in bed, with your leg elevated on a rolled cloak, you think about the bucket, about how much it is held and how quietly. You think about the razors lined up like silverfish on the cloth. You think about the way the barber surgeon touched your foot like it mattered. Like it wasn't a problem, but a thing to be made right. You fall asleep to the echo of a wet cloth being wrung out, and the hush of wine being poured, and the dull clink of a blade in a basin. There is no glory in this kind of medicine, but there is dignity, and sometimes that's enough. Smells and sickness, the morning air is thick, not with fog exactly, but with something heavier and harder to name. A kind of wetness that clings to the stones and walls and to the folds of your cloak as you step outside. The streets are quiet in the way that early markets often are, just beginning to stir with people who move slowly and keep to themselves, their eyes lowered, their mouths covered in wool scarves or scraps of linen soaked in vinegar. Somewhere nearby, someone is burning a bundle of rosemary. The smoke drifting in curls through the mist, curling against the timber-bird eaves. It smells sharp and clean, but also old like something remembered rather than freshly made. You breathe it in deeply, not because it comforts you, but because you were told to. Because the scent, they say, drives sickness away. In the medieval mind, illness was not invisible. It had shape and motion, and most of all scent. The air itself could carry plague or fever or melancholy, especially if it was stagnant or humid or rising from swamps or crowded city lanes. Bad smells weren't just unpleasant, they were dangerous, a sign that the air had turned wicked, that it had become a carrier of corrupted humors, rising from rot and sewage and sin. And so the answer, they believed, was to fight smell with smell. A sweet scent could push away a foul one. Strong perfume could act as armor. If you carried herbs in your pockets and wore rosewater on your skin, perhaps the air would pass over. You ignoring your lungs, sparing your blood. Doctors knew this. They walked through the cities in long waxed robes, stiff like parchment and heavy as tents, their heads covered by the iconic mask long, beak-like, and otherworldly. The beak wasn't just for appearance. It was filled with herbs, carefully packed to purify each breath. Lavender, mint, thyme, cloves, sometimes even dried oranges studded with spices. The physician breathed through this aromatic filter, trusting it to protect him from the foulness outside. In some cases, he held a handkerchief soaked in rose oil, which he lifted to his nose before entering the homes of the sick. The theory was not that the patient could infect the doctor by touch, but that the stench of illness might creep in through the nostrils, like smoke through a crack in the door. If the scent of life could be stronger than the scent of death, then perhaps the balance could be tipped. Houses were fumigated, not with chemicals, but with burnt herbs, smoldering resin, and sometimes crushed juniper tossed on hot coals. The ritual was careful and unhurried. Doors and windows would be closed, thick cloths pushed into the cracks. The smoke would gather, inside like mist in a forest, clinging to beams and bedsheets. People sat in it, breathed it, let it coat their clothes and hair. Some even walked slowly through the rooms, swinging a censer or iron dish filled with pine needles, believing the Movement helped spread the healing smell. Afterward, the doors were opened wide. The bad air was swept out with bundles of straw and feathers, or fanned away with cloaks. It was not clean in the modern sense, but it felt purified. The scent lingered on their skin like a memory of protection. Perfume was medicine. The rich carried pomanders, small metal balls on chains, filled with herbs and crushed flowers. They dangled from belts or necklaces, warm from the body and always close to the nose. In courts and monasteries, rooms were scattered with dried petals, and servants were sent to walk the halls trailing smoke behind them. In hospitals, especially during outbreaks, bowls of vinegar were placed beneath the beds, with herbs floating like tiny ships on the surface. And in the humbler houses, women simmered onions and garlic on the hearth, not to eat, but to release their scent. Strong smells were good. Sharp smells were better. If it made your eyes water, it must be working. The city itself was a challenge. Streets were not clean. Waste piled in corners. Animals lived close. Gutters ran with things no one wanted to name. There were efforts, sporadic ones, to keep the smells under control. Laws were passed, briefly enforced, asking butchers to move their stalls, asking tanners to work downstream, asking residents not to dump refuse from windows. But the smells always returned, and so the people returned to their herbs, to their incense, to the burning of sulfur and sweet-smelling wood, hoping the air could be changed by what was burned into it. Cleanliness, in a sense, became something olfactory. If it smelled like sage or lavender, it must be safe. If it smelled like vinegar or wine, it must be working in times of plague. The rituals intensified. Whole neighborhoods were burned out not by fire, but by smoke. People stayed inside as priests walked the streets swinging censers filled with resin and myrrh. Sometimes the sick were taken outside briefly, held in the breeze, turned gently toward the wind, as if the fresh air could pull the sickness out like a tide. The countryside was believed to be safer, and so some fled the cities, walking through fields of wild thyme and daisies, breathing deeply. In those moments, the fear softened slightly. The air smelled of grass and soil and wind, and for a time, that seemed enough. But even outside the city, people remained cautious. They hung herbs over doors, tied bundles of rosemary to the rafters. They washed their floors with vinegar and left orange peels on the hearth. When guests came, they were sprinkled with rose water. When children sneezed, someone waved smoke near their face and whispered a prayer. Sickness was in the air. But so was healing, and the line between the two could be drawn, perhaps, with smell. Monasteries had their own approaches. In the apothecary gardens, monks grew lavender, hyssop, and wormwood, harvesting them just before bloom, drying them carefully in bundles along the rafters. The smell of these places was quiet and sharp, part kitchen, part chapel. The monks infused their oils, steeped their tonics, distilled their own perfumes, which they used in both devotion and care. Incense was not just for prayer, it was for the lungs, for the corridors of the sick, for keeping the spirit awake while the body trembled. You walk now through one such corridor, narrow and slightly sloped, with stone walls warmed by the sun, and a draft that smells faintly of mint. Somewhere nearby, a window has been opened, and a row of herbs hangs in the breeze, tied with twine and slowly twirling. You pass an open basin of vinegar, a cloth draped nearby for dipping. You see a nurse or perhaps a novice gently sprinkling. Water on the floor, not to clean it, but to keep the dust down, to keep the air cool and damp. Her hands smell of thyme and soap. She nods to you without speaking. At the end of the hall, a room holds a patient. An older woman, thin but alert, sits on a cot with a poultice on her chest and a small bowl of oranges beside her. She wears a necklace of garlic cloves and has a strip of linen tied around her nose, soaked in something strong. The room smells like a garden left in the rain. A candle burns beside her, the wax pooling slowly, the flame tilting with the breeze. She is not in pain now. She is not afraid. She has her smell, her smoke, her string of garlic. It is enough for the moment. Sit beside her for a while. neither of you speaking. She dozes. You watch the smoke rise and drift toward the ceiling, where it gathers like breath held gently in a warm mouth. There's nothing sterile here, nothing metallic. But there is calm and warmth and a sense that even if the science is unsure, the ritual has meaning. People did what they could. They believed what they needed. They opened windows and burned rosemary and hoped the air would be kind. Later, you return to your own chamber. You light a small bundle of dried sage and wave it slowly through the room. The scent wraps itself around the wooden beams, settles into the rough wool blanket on your bed. You sprinkle a little vinegar near the hearth, just enough to catch the edge of your nose. It smells sharp, but not unpleasant. You lie down, breathing deeply. The air is not clean by modern standards, but it is yours. And it is ready. Astrology. And treatment plans, the stars are not so much bright as they are patient small flickers of cold light, resting far above the thatched rooftops and wet garden walls. You lie in your bed tonight, beneath rough wool and crackling thatch, the faint scent of beeswax and dry rushes around you. Outside, the sky turns, quietly and endlessly, as it has every night since the world began. In this quiet world of flickering, stars and dim chambers, there is a belief that has lasted centuries, that illness begins not only in the body, but in the heavens. That your pulse, your fever, your aching shoulder or churning stomach might be traced gently and precisely to the distant curve of a planet or the rise of a moon dot in the Middle Ages. The body and the sky were not separate things. They were mirrors. What happened above was echoed below. The heavens were a kind of book, and those who studied them were not merely stargazers, but physicians, readers of an ancient text written in light and motion. Before any cutting, bleeding, or leeching began, the physician would first consult the stars. He would unroll a chart, slightly yellowed at the edges, the ink faded from use, and carefully mark your birth date, your current symptoms, and the present phase of the moon. There was no rush. Medicine was not a matter of urgency, but of timing. And so the physician would pause, holding a quill above the page, and look toward the heavens, not with awe, but with methodical curiosity. Each planet had its role. Mars was hot and dry, full of aggression and fire. Venus was moist and warm, a planet of softness and passion. Mercury was changeable, fast, full of nervous energy. Jupiter, slow and generous. Saturn, cold, heavy, melancholic. The moon controlled fluids, the tides, the womb, the brain. The sun brought balance, light, vitality. These were not symbols. They were systems. Your cough might be caused by an excess of Mars. Your sadness might stem from Saturn. If the moon was waning, now was not the time to lance a boil. If Mercury was in retrograde, perhaps your physician would delay bloodletting until the air calmed and the stars returned to their usual order dot. To treat a body was to read a chart, not only of humors but of horoscopes. Every treatment plan began with an astrological table, not drawn in haste but in quiet calculation, using compasses and copper instruments, each arc and angle carefully measured by candlelight. The physician would sit in his study perhaps, in a monastery, perhaps above an apothecary shop, his elbows resting on a worn wooden desk, his fingers stained with ink and dried wormwood. The fire would crackle behind him. The hourglass would turn once, maybe twice. And when at last the chart was complete, he would lean back, sigh softly, and declare, "Tomorrow, at the 3rd hour after sunrise, the bloodletting may begin. The moon will be in Virgo." Each zodiac sign ruled a part of the body. Aries ruled the head, Taurus the neck, Gemini the arms, Cancer the chest, Leo the heart, Virgo the stomach, Libra the kidneys, Scorpio the genitals, Sagittarius the thighs, Capricorn the knees, Aquarius the shins, Pisces the feet. If the moon was passing through a particular sign, that body part was considered vulnerable. No incisions, bleedings, or surgeries would be done there until the moon moved on. To ignore this was not only foolish, it was dangerous. The stars, after all, were not decorative. They were instructional. Patients accepted this without question. They would arrive at the physician's home, their symptoms already known, their urine already examined, and they would sit silently as the doctor peered at the sky through a narrow window, nodding slightly, checking the planetary tables tucked in the drawer beside his surgical tools. It was not unlike prayer, the same posture, the same hushed reverence. And when the physician announced that treatment would wait another day, or must happen at dawn, or should be performed facing east with Jupiter in the ascendant, the patient would nod solemnly, as if agreeing not just with a diagnosis, but with the stars themselves. Hospitals had star charts tacked to the walls, not with glittering gold or bright color, but in plain black ink on parchment squares and circles and angled lines, dense with names: Saturn, Mars, Leo, Scorpio. There were special calendars that marked the auspicious times for bleeding, purging, fasting, or prayer. The phases of the moon were tracked more carefully than the weather. Surgeons waited for the right hour. Apothecaries brewed tonics only when the planets aligned properly for the ingredients involved. A root picked under the wrong constellation might be weaker. A poultice applied under a waning moon might fail. And so the medicine waited for the stars, moving not by the clock, but by the cosmos. Even births were timed by astrology. The midwife would glance at the sky as the labor progressed, noting the hour and the angle of the stars, quietly whispering to herself whether the child would grow melancholic or sanguine, courageous or cautious. A child born under Mars might be fiery and prone to accidents. One born under Venus might be healthy, but overly romantic. The child's chart would be kept, perhaps tucked in the corner of a family Bible or copied into a physician's ledger. Consulted again if sickness came in future years. And then, of course, there were the talismans. Small items worn around the neck or hidden in pockets, made of metal or stone or ink, crafted according to planetary hours. A charm made under the rule of Jupiter might be good for digestion. One made under Saturn might protect against melancholy. There were no guarantees, but there were patterns, and for many that was enough. If illness was chaos, then astrology was its map, a way to navigate the fog using stars that, unlike the body, never lied. The church had mixed feelings, of course. Astrology veered close to heresy, a practice too easily confused with magic or pagan rites, but it was tolerated cautiously when done properly, when kept within bounds, when used not for prophecy, but for healing. Even clerics studied the stars, if only to know when to fast, when to plant, when to pray. The monasteries had their own calendars, scribbled with moon phases and feast days and notes on when certain herbs should be harvested for best effect. The stars were not holy, but they were useful dot in a world without blood tests or microscopes. The sky was the grandest and most exacting diagnostic tool available. It offered something medicine rarely could: order. Illness seemed random. A man grew feverish in the night. A woman coughed for months. A child never walked again, and no one knew why. But if the stars were involved, then at least it wasn't chaos. It was alignment. It was imbalance. It was pattern. And what has pattern perhaps can be corrected. Tonight, the physician lies awake, not far from you, his fingers tracing invisible lines in the air above his bed. He has spent his life learning this craft, how the stars breathe into the body, how Jupiter affects the liver, how the moon stirs the brain. He has drawn hundreds of charts, some more accurate than others. He has delayed treatments, adjusted doses, and refused to touch a patient until Mercury moved forward again. He has watched the sun rise on a Tuesday morning, declared it a bad day for cutting, and sent a man home with nothing but wine and instructions to return on Friday. He is not always right, but he is sincere. And when he wakes, he will check the stars once more, just to be sure. Somewhere down the road, a woman with aching joints soaks her feet in warm water and whispers the name of Venus. A young boy with a toothache holds a small copper charm engraved with the sign of Aries. A tired farmer stands outside his barn, looking up at the moon and wondering whether it's time to see the apothecary. And in a low stone chapel, a monk traces constellations into the dust beside the altar, charting the weeks fasts and healings with the patience of someone who believes the sky has answers. Even if we do not, and you wrapped in wool, breathing, slowly your eyes drifting closed, you feel the pull of that old belief, too. That somewhere above, cold and silent and precise, the stars still know your name. That your rest tonight matters. That your pulse, slow and steady, aligns with something older than fear. The stars do not cure, but they comfort. And sometimes that is enough. The doctrine of signatures. You are walking through a slow, sun-warmed meadow, not in any particular hurry, and the light is the color of warm milk steeped in chamomile. The air smells of moss and wild mint, and the earth under your feet is soft, neither wet nor dry, just slightly giving. There are plants all around. You leaves, stems, roots, seeds, and in the medieval mind, each one is not just a plant, but a clue. Nature, they believed, was a kind of patient, generous handwriting. Every leaf bore meaning. Every root was marked. Everything that grew had a purpose, if only you could learn to read it. This belief at the appearance of a plant revealed the illness it could cure was called the doctrine of signatures, and it made the natural world into a gentle sort of puzzle. Walnuts looked like brains, and so, of course, they were thought to be good for the brain. Liverwort resembled the lobes of the liver and was used to treat liver complaints. Yellow flowers were taken as cures for jaundice. Red sap meant a plant. Must be good for blood. It was not superstition. Exactly. It was something softer, an attempt to make sense of suffering by imagining that nature had been marked with labels. Subtle and symbolic if you only look closely enough. Herbalists. And monks would walk in slow loops through the woods, robes brushing over damp ferns, eyes narrowed toward roots and pods and leaves. They believed that God had placed a sign on every useful plant, a divine note, written in shape and color. If a flower's petals curled like ears, it must treat earaches. If a plant's texture felt rough and cracked like diseased skin, surely it could soothe rashes. No microscope, no laboratory, no peer-reviewed certainty. Only pattern, observation, and the quiet hope that creation had not left the sick entirely unprovided for Dot in the stillness of the monastery garden. Brother Alaric stooped over a row of borage. The blue, star-shaped blossoms lifted slightly in. The breeze, their stems prickly and stiff. He reached down and touched the leaves, which were shaped like a wide-open palm. Borage, it was said, gave courage. Perhaps because of its color or because its leaves were heart-shaped if you squinted in the right light. He did not ask how it worked. He simply steeped it into wine and gave it to the anxious, the melancholic, the faint of heart. If it didn't cure the fear, it at least gave shape to the hope of curing it, and sometimes that was enough. Elsewhere, a woman gathered lungwort from a forest edge, its spotted leaves reminiscent, she thought, of the spongy tissue of lungs. It was boiled into a thin syrup and given to those with a cough that rattled deep in the chest. For centuries, people swore by it, not because it worked in any measurable way, but because it looked like it should. There was a kind of comfort in this mirrored logic. You did not need to understand anatomy. You only needed to understand resemblance. The doctrine extended beyond herbs, reaching into stones, animals, and even colors. A red gemstone might be worn to prevent nosebleeds. A snake-shaped root might ward off venom. Yellow spices like turmeric were thought to brighten the complexion. The logic was consistent in its inconsistency. Everything meant something. If something made you think of the ailment, it must also contain the cure. Even smells played a role. Pungent herbs were good for blockages. Sweet-smelling flowers calmed the nerves. The more distinctive a plant seemed, the more certain its signature dot in the still. Dim corners of the apothecary shop. Dusty jars lined the walls, tightly corked, labeled in curling script. There was powder of beetroot, dried rose hips, crushed pearl, and shredded lichen. Behind the counter, the apothecary moved slowly, measuring pinches of this and that into a small cloth bag. He paused, examining the golden threads of saffron, and remembered that their sun-like hue was good for gloom. Not proven, but pleasing. He tied the bag with twine and handed it to the waiting customer, who tucked it into their sleeve with quiet gratitude. The doctrine of signatures was not merely charming. It was part of the medical canon. Texts copied and recopied across Europe repeated these ideas as if they were as natural as gravity. Hildegard of Bingen, the famous abbess and healer, described plants and stones in terms of their forms and how those forms revealed their spiritual use. Even Paracelsus, a Renaissance physician with alchemical leanings, argued that nature marked each remedy with a visible sign. The physician should not be ignorant of the signs, he wrote, lest he miss what is placed plainly before him. You might sit, as many did, in the stone infirmary of an abbey or a small town hospital, the walls thick with the scent of thyme and warm bread. A healer would come to you, fingers stained green from crushing herbs, and hand you a poultice made of mashed leaves that looked vaguely like your ailment. You would press it to your temple or chest and close your eyes, not because you believed in its chemistry, but because you believed in its meaning. This leaf looks like your pain. It is your mirror, and in applying it, you are not only treating the symptom, but acknowledging it. That too is a kind of medicine. Children were taught to recognize the signs in the garden. An herb with purple veined leaves might be taught as good for fever dreams. A flower that drooped might be said to revive drooping spirits. Every morning, plants were gathered just after the dew had dried, believed to be the moment when their signatures were most potent. Roots were dug with small wooden spades, dried in kitchens or hanging from the rafters, their shapes inspected and considered as carefully as any letter of scripture. Even the act of foraging was meditative, a kind of slow diagnosis of the land itself. In cities, the doctrine mingled with commerce. Herbalists advertised their wares based on visible signatures. A shop might display a dried root that looks strikingly like a human hand and sell it as a cure for arthritis. Another might offer liver-shaped mushrooms from the far corners of the forest, believed to strengthen digestion. Some of these worked by chance or chemistry. Many didn't, but belief has its own gravity. And when illness came with no clear explanation, resemblance felt as valid as any other theory. There was something gentle in the doctrine's assumptions. It did not suggest punishment or sin as the source of suffering. It suggested connection, that the world was not built carelessly, that every affliction had a companion in nature. That pain was not random, but matched. You were never truly alone in your illness. There was always a plant somewhere, shaped like your wound. Even now, in the modern world of scans and samples, the idea lingers faintly. We say ginger is good for the stomach, perhaps because its root twists like intestines. We choose red wine for the heart, perhaps because of its color. We slice a carrot and note that its cross-section resembles an eye. These comparisons may be accidental, but they're comforting. They give the illusion of sense. And in times of confusion, sense, even symbolic, can feel like medicine. Tonight, as you lie wrapped in wool beneath your small window, the scent of lavender still clinging to your sleeves, you think of the herbalists who believed in the whisper of form. You picture them moving through meadows and woodlands, eyes always alert for shapes and colors that spoke quietly of healing. A heart-shaped leaf for heartbreak, a twisted root for cramping, a flowering stalk that stands tall again and again for hope. The doctrine did not solve every illness, but it softened it. And in a world where healing was slow and uncertain, softness mattered. The world was, they believed, full of signatures. Some obvious, some hidden in your job. If you wished to heal, it was simply to keep looking, to walk slowly, to pay attention, to trust that your pain had a twin growing quietly in the soil, waiting to be found. Blessed remedies and holy water. You are not in a physician's chamber tonight. There are no iron tools, no leeches in glass jars, no mortar, no pestle, no humors to be discussed. Instead, you find yourself in the quiet nave of a small chapel. The air smells of melted wax and old wood, with a hint of incense lingering in the upper beams. It is dim, always dim, even at midday, but especially now just past dusk, when the sun has slipped beneath the edge of the hills, and only the candles are left to hold the light. Somewhere far off, someone coughs. You draw your cloak a little, tighter, and move toward the altar. You are not here for confession. You are here for healing, because in the Middle Ages, healing was never confined to powders and plasters. It belonged just as much to the saints, to holy relics, to waters that had touched sacred fingers or soaked in sacred wells. A wound might be washed in wine or swaddled in pig fat, yes. But it might also be sprinkled with holy water gathered from a font with trembling hands and flicked carefully across the skin, as if the droplets might draw out not just infection, but misfortune itself. The faithful believed that illness was often a test or a mark or sometimes a kind of invisible poison placed by sin, chance, or spirits. And so, just as you might turn to an apothecary for a remedy made of herbs, you might turn to a priest for something slower, older, and scented with incense. A relic might help, a bone, a tooth, a shred of a robe tucked into a carved box of silver and glass, kept behind a small door in a chapel wall. It did not matter that the bone was dry, or that the robe had long since frayed. What mattered was that it had once touched someone holy, someone who had healed, or been healed, or simply endured. To sit near a relic was to draw in its strength. Many would travel for days, wrapped in shawls, bent with fevers, just to sit in his presence for a while. There was no chant, no prescribed action, just nearness, and sometimes a gentle prayer mumbled not as a spell, but as a kind of soft reaching. The faithful might light a candle for healing, placing it gently into a long row of flickering flames, each one a hope made visible. The candle did not cure the illness, but it held the weight of asking. And in that small gesture, warm wax, short breath, the silence of a stone chapel, there was a balm all its own. If healing did not come, at least peace might. And in the absence of understanding, peace was its own kind of cure. You may picture a woman arriving at a holy well, somewhere in the green, damp hills of Wales or Ireland, her cloak wet at the hem from rain, her fingers wrapped tightly around a child's wrist. The child has been feverish for days. The physician could not help. The herbs did nothing. And so she has come here to a place where water is said to run with memory, with sanctity, with something unseen. She kneels and dips a cloth into the well. She presses it to the child's forehead. There is no sudden change, no miracle. But the child rests a little more easily that night. And so she returns the next day, and the next dot throughout Europe. There were places like this, shrines, wells, chapels, where healing was not performed, but allowed. Where people came not to be operated on, but to wait. To touch stone, to lean against ancient wood, to weep softly and be held in silence. In many ways, this was not medicine at all. But in the medieval mind, it was healing just the same. Pilgrimage was one such healing journey. A person, sick or troubled, might walk for weeks or even months to reach the tomb of a saint. The journey itself was part of the medicine. The hardship of the road was a kind of purging. The ache in the feet, the exposure to rain, the simple act of moving forward, these were understood as the body's way of realigning with the divine. And when the pilgrim finally reached the holy place, be it Santiago, Canterbury, or some lesser-known shrine tucked in the forest, they would lie before the relics and simply wait, not for a doctor, not for a priest, even, but for some small mercy to be felt in the bones-dotted shrines. There were often bowls of water blessed by monks. Some of these waters had been mixed with dirt from a grave or dust from a saint's cloak. Pilgrims would anoint themselves slowly, rubbing it into their palms or onto the chest. In some places, strips of cloth called cluties were tied to trees near holy springs, each one left by someone seeking healing. The cloth left to rot away as the illness was said to do. The trees became quiet forests of hope branches, heavy with faded linens, fluttering in the breeze like prayers loosened from the hand dot in monasteries. Healing combined the sacred and the herbal. A monk might whisper a psalm as he crushed garlic into a poultice. A sister might chant softly as she boiled herbs for a fevered child. Some prayers were specific. chants against the falling sickness, or blessings against infection. But most were simple invocations of protection, of presence. The belief was not that the words alone cured the body, but that they opened it to receive healing in whatever form it might come. Holy water was perhaps the gentlest of these remedies. Gathered in simple vessels, sprinkled across beds, over thresholds, over wounds, it was not believed to cleanse in the modern sense. It cleansed something quieter, something older. It was the opposite of violence, where surgery cut and bloodletting. Drained holy water simply touch. It marked the space as sacred. It reminded the sick that they were not forgotten, that even in pain, they were still part of a wider design, still held within merciful. For mental afflictions, too, the church had its role. Madness was seen as a spiritual wound, sometimes the work of demons, sometimes a sign of divine attention, sometimes just mystery. The afflicted might be brought to a chapel and wrapped in clean cloths. Prayers would be said. Hands might rest lightly on the head. Holy water was sprinkled again and again, sometimes over many days. It did not cure, always. But it softened the madness, or at least gave it a place to be. The mind, so often adrift, found itself held in a rhythm of bells, of Latin phrases, of soft candlelight and quiet touch. There were dangers, of course. Not all miracles arrived. Some relics were fakes. Some pilgrims died along the road. Some sick were told to pray harder, to fast longer, to give more alms. But for many, these sacred treatments were not alternatives to medicine, they were companions to it. You might take a draught of vinegar steeped with sage in the morning, and then walk to the church to sit in the cool shade of the nave by afternoon. You might wear a relic around your neck while applying a poultice to your chest. The soul and the body were not separate, and so neither were there cures. And even those who doubted, those who rolled their eyes at tales of relics glowing or water flowing uphill, might still find comfort in the rituals. The act of lighting a candle, the feel of a hand on the shoulder, the rhythm of whispered prayer in a time of pain. Healing in this world was not about control. It was about letting go, about offering the wound to something older, larger, and waiting. You lie now in a narrow bed in a room that smells of beeswax and smoke. A small wooden bowl of holy water sits on the table beside you. A candle flickers. It is quiet. Outside, someone sings faintly in a language you do not understand, and you do not need to. You feel the weight of the wool blanket, the stillness of the walls, and the slow breath of your chest rising and falling. You're not healed yet, but you're not alone. And in this moment, that is enough. Treating the plague gently, bare, is a quiet in the streets now. The kind of stillness that feels full, not empty. You notice how your feet sound on the cobblestone, soft, uneven, slightly muffled by wind-blown dust and damp. In this small town, the windows are shuttered, doors closed. The air carries a scent of wood smoke, lavender, and something harder to name, a sweetness that's begun to spoil. A bell tolls slowly from somewhere far away. No one is rushing. No one has rushed in days. This is plague time. Not the sharp horror of it, not the panic beginning, but the middle part. The long, slow stretch where every movement grows careful. Where even the wind seems unsure. And still there are treatments, strange ones. Gentle ones. Hopes pinned to sense, to prayers, to rituals that don't so much cure as help you bear it. You sit quietly inside a house that has been sealed, not in fear, but in order. The cracks around the door have been stuffed with cloth, egg, and vinegar. The air inside is warm and close, full of herbal smoke. Someone burned rosemary an hour ago, and the scent still hangs in the air like memory. On the table, there are bundles of dried herbs thyme, sage, hyssop tied with twine, ready to be lit again. These were believed to purify the air, to ward off the miasma, the invisible fog of rot and illness that was thought to drift through cities like a ghostly tide. No one could see it, but they believed it was everywhere. And so they burned plants, they boiled vinegar, they carried flowers in their sleeves. A nose full of sweetness, they thought, would keep the sickness from slipping in. Doctors dressed. Slowly, not in white coats or soft cotton gloves, but in wax robes, long and heavy. Their faces were hidden behind curved beak-like masks, stuffed with cloves, myrrh, rose petals, mint. The beak was not a costume. It was a filter, a gentle effort to keep the rot at bay. The eyes were covered in glass, the hands in thick leather. And still, they moved quietly, slowly, as if afraid to stir the air too much. A plague doctor might visit only briefly, leaving behind a sachet of herbs or a softly worded instruction to burn more juniper. There was no cure, but there was process. And process, in a time of fear, became its own kind of medicine, inside the home. Those who had not fallen ill still performed small rituals of care. The sick were laid in cool rooms, windows cracked just slightly for air, heads wrapped in damp cloth. Infused water was spooned into dry mouth, water with vinegar, with lemon balm, with slices of onion or garlic steeped until the sharpness mellowed. No one knew whether it helped, but it was something to do, something to offer. And in the silence between coughs, there was the quiet sound of someone grinding more herbs in a mortar, slow, circular, thoughtful. There were poultices, too. Thick, unpleasant mixtures of figs, onions, and yeast, sometimes mashed together with butter or pitch, applied to the swollen places in hopes that they might draw out the poison. Some recipes called for dried toad, others for crushed emerald, and still others more practical, simply relied on clay and ash. The poultices were warm when first laid on, then cooled slowly, like bread left out to rest. They did not always help, but again they gave the sick something soft to feel against the skin, and the caregiver something to do with trembling hands, and then there were charms. Not always official, but always present. A ribbon tied around the wrist, a prayer etched into the wall in chalk, a ring worn for protection, washed in holy water, kissed 3 times. Some hung amulets made from dried flowers or small carvings of saints. Others wrote their names in candles and watched them melt down to wax, hoping to be forgotten by the illness. It was not science, but it was comfort. And comfort was its own quiet prescription. For those who were able, there were pilgrimages, even. During plague, though often discouraged, some still traveled, slipping away from towns and into open countryside, where they believed the air was cleaner, the danger less dense. They walked for days, wrapped in scarves, avoiding others, avoiding questions. They carried with them small vials of perfume, pieces of dried orange stuck with cloves, not to trade, not to sell, just to breathe, to remind themselves that life still smelled of something beyond decay. Monasteries tried to help where they could. Monks opened guest rooms, offered warm broth, pressed cool cloths to fevered heads. They read from the Psalms, slowly, in Latin. Not because it was understood, but because it was rhythm, and rhythm helped the mind not collapse in fear. Sometimes the sick were laid near relics. Sometimes they were simply held. No great gestures. Just presence. Just kindness dot outside the city gates. Plague pits were dug silent places, watched over by men with covered faces and stiff posture. The bodies were wrapped gently when they could be, sprinkled with vinegar, sometimes with herbs. A flower left here, a prayer whispered there. The pits are often remembered in history as grim, but in reality, they were also places of effort, of last small mercies, of someone taking the time to fold a cloth, to smooth a brow. It was, in its way, part of the treatment, not to save, but to honor for those who remained untouched. Prevention was an art of its own. Homes were fumigated with sulfur. Garlic was eaten in vast, eye-watering quantities. Some wore talismans inscribed with astrological symbols. Others followed the guidance of almanacs and consulted moon phases before opening windows. Bloodletting was tried early in the illness. Sometimes purgatives were taken, harsh and fast. But often, after the first flurry of treatment, things simply slowed. The patient was laid down. A candle lit, and all there was left to do was wait. There is a story of a village where no one fled. They stayed, cared for each other, dug graves, boiled herbs, sang songs when the coughing would stop. Perhaps it's true. Perhaps it isn't. But it reflects a truth deeper than fact that even in plague, the desire to help remained. Not through cures, but through closeness. Through the small acts, a fresh cloth, a shared sip of wine, the soft sound of footsteps at night, pacing from one room to the next, chucking dot to night, in this dream of a medieval world you lie under. Wool, listening to the distant hush of a wind that smells of rosemary and rain. The illness has passed your door, for now. Or perhaps it's still lingering in the alley, unsure whether to knock. You have burned the herbs. You have washed your hands in wine. You have said the prayers. You have lit the candle. And now, you simply rest. There is no fear here. Not now. Just stillness. Just the memory of a time when people did the best they could with what they had, even when what they had was little more than hope wrapped in linen and rose petals scattered across the floor. They didn't run, not always. They didn't panic, not always. They opened windows. They tied flowers to their sleeves. They whispered names in darkened rooms. And slowly, strangely, some survived. Not because of the incense or the red cord worn around the waist, but because care, even when powerless, keeps something. Alive. Wound care, with wine and will you, wake slowly, not to sunlight, but to the steady rhythm of footsteps over wooden floorboards and the soft clink of metal in a shallow basin. The air smells faintly of beeswax, wool, and a hint of something. Sharper, maybe rosemary steeped in wine, or maybe just old wood kept clean with vinegar and cloth. You are not in a hospital, not as you would know it. You are in the infirmary wing of a quiet abbey, or perhaps the back room of a barber surgeon shop in a market town, or even a small domestic chamber somewhere in the countryside, where the cleanest table has been cleared and the window propped open to let in a bit of sky. You've been wounded not gravely, but enough to warrant attention. A fall, perhaps, or a knife slipped while cooking, or gathering rushes, or repairing tack. And now, here you lie, a rough linen shift wrapped around your chest, your legs covered. In a blanket that smells of smoke and lavender, while someone tends to the injury with the kind of care that is neither rushed nor hesitant. Wound care in the medieval world was not a science of precision, but it was an art of attention. The wound would be uncovered slowly, the cloths peeled back like old pages of a well-read book, sometimes stiff with dried blood, sometimes damp from the herbs laid on in earlier attempts. Nothing is thrown away quickly, each rag is examined, each stain read like a quiet message from the body. The person tending to you does not speak much. There's no flurry of instructions, no sharp orders. Just a bowl, warm in the hands, filled with wine that's been boiled with herbs and left to cool to the perfect touch. Not cold, not hot, but somewhere in between. The wine is not for drinking, not today. It is a cleanser, a comfort, a ritual, poured gently over the wound. It stings a little, but only at first. And then the pain softens into a kind of warmth. You feel the liquid slide slowly across your skin, pooling, then soaking into the linen beneath you, and then you feel it stop. Silence again, but the good kind, the kind where nothing is expected of you except stillness. A cloth is pressed lightly over the wound, not rubbed. Just laid down like a promise, then lifted, then pressed again. The process is slow, repetitive, and almost hypnotic. This is not surgery. This is care. Sometimes the wine is mixed with herbs, yarrow, comfrey, chamomile boiled until the scent fills the room. The steam curling around wooden beams and settling into your clothes. Sometimes honey is added, thick and golden and strangely soothing. Used not just for sweetness, but for its quiet strength, its ability to keep rot at bay. A thin layer of it might be spread across the skin with a wooden spatula or the back of a spoon. There is no rush. Wound care is not about speed. It is about watching, waiting, tending. The person treating you checks the edges of the wound, not just for redness or heat, but for how it feels under the fingers, for the way your breath changes as they touch a certain point. There are no thermometers, No scans, just the senses. Tuned carefully over years of practice, sight, smell, touch, and an old, patient kind of listening. If the wound needs closing, it may be sewn, but only if it is clean. Threads made from animal sinew or fine linen dipped in wine pass through. The skin with slow care, each stitch tied like a blessing, not tight, not hurried, just enough to bring the skin near enough to knit. And if it cannot be sewn, it will be wrapped. First a soft pad, sometimes wool teased until fluffy, sometimes moss gathered from the woods, dried and warmed near the fire. Then a bandage long and winding, dipped in warm wine before being wrapped around the limb in overlapping layers. The bandage smells of wood smoke, of herbs, of hands that know how to tie without squeezing. And over the top, perhaps a final cloth one that's been embroidered long ago, worn thin from many washings, kept for patience, not because it heals, but because it comforts. After the wrapping comes the rest. You are not sent home. You are not left alone. You are simply left to lie there, warm and still. The bandages gently compressing the pain into something manageable. A window is opened a little more. A new candle is lit. Someone leaves a bowl of barley broth on the stool beside the bed. Not hot, but warm enough to ease the stomach. You drink slowly, feeling the heat reach the corners of you, where the ache has settled. You are not alone here. You are watched, but kindly. Someone checks your wound again at sunset. Then, again, in the morning, a little more wine is poured. A little more wool is wrapped. If fever comes, it is treated with cool claws and prayers. If sleep comes, no one wakes you. And if healing comes, it does so gradually through time, through warmth, through care that looks like stillness. There are books in this infirmary, some copied by hand, full of diagrams of wounds and treatments, of how to bleed a boil or make a compress from marigold petals and egg whites. The people tending you do not need to read them every day. They already know the motions. But the books are there just in case. And sometimes when they think you are asleep, they open them and read softly aloud, as if knowledge itself might settle over you like a second blanket. Outside, the world continues. The market calls. The fields wait, the seasons shift. But here in this room, time moves differently. It doesn't pass, it flows. Slow and syrupy, like warmed honey, like old wine, like healing. You don't need to think. You don't need to understand the herbs or the wrapping or the wine. You just need to lie still, to breathe in the wool, the lavender, the faint trace of ash that lives in every old wooden wall. You are in good hands, and those hands, though calloused, are careful. You are not a mystery to them. You are a person. You are a wound. You are a body slowly remembering what it is to be whole. And even if the healing is imperfect, even if the scar stays, or the stiffness never leaves completely, you will have been seen and cleaned and held. And that, too, is medicine, Doc, tomorrow. Perhaps the bandages will come off, or perhaps not. Perhaps another rinse, another wrap. Another evening of broth and candlelight and a faint sound of prayers being sung in a distant room. But tonight, the fire is low, the wine has done its work, and the wool has settled around your wound like a second skin. Sleep, now. Let the healing continue without your attention. You've done enough. Mental illness and spirits, the mind, in medieval times was not seen the way we see it now. It was not wires and chemicals and diagnoses. It was a garden, a battlefield, a holy place, a haunted house. When the mind suffered, it was often said to be touched by spirits or burdened by sadness that had nowhere to go. Some called it melancholy or madness or possession. Others called it divine, and still others simply called it strange. But no matter the name, the suffering was real, and the treatments, while odd to modern ears, were offered slowly, carefully, with an odd kind of gentleness that sometimes bordered on poetry. There was no single cure, no clear path, but there was care. There was always care. You lie now in a room quieter than most, where the candles are kept low and voices are hushed. This is the place where those who hear voices or feel too much or not enough, are brought to rest. Sometimes they come screaming, sometimes in silence, sometimes with shaking hands, sometimes with their hands tied, and sometimes simply with eyes that no longer seem to see what others do. The people who tend to them do not speak of cures. They speak of balance, of calm, of cooling the blood, or lightening the humors. They speak of Saturn, of lunar influence, of grief trapped in the gut. A patient who refuses food may be fed gently with broth poured along the side of the mouth. One who refuses to speak may be left alone for a time with soft chants echoing from another room. Music was sometimes believed to soothe the disordered mind. Harps played slowly. Psalms sung in long, low tones like wind moving through the bones. Old. The idea was not to cure with sound, but to bring the mind back into rhythm. The disordered thought might find comfort in ordered song. Baths were another remedy. Long soaks in warm water infused with herbs, lavender, chamomile. Marjoram were believed to draw out bad spirits or at least soften the heart. The water was poured slowly. The person bathed, not scrubbed, just held, gently lowered, and then lifted, as if returning them to themselves by degrees. Fasting was common, though often dangerous. A mind overwhelmed by visions might be treated. By limiting food, the belief being that the body, once purified, would no longer give rise to chaos. Some were starved. Others simply offered only soft bread and boiled roots. For those considered possessed, the line between care and punishment could blur. Some were chained, not harshly, but as a precaution, like tying down a storm so it didn't blow the roof away. Others were sprinkled with holy water. Some were prayed over by monks who believed their madness might be divine, a thin place between this world and the next. A person hearing voices might be seen not as sick, but as a vessel, though that too could be lonely and frightening. In some towns, a person with a troubled mind might be brought to a shrine, led barefoot for miles by family, in search of healing from a saint known to cure madness. There, a relic might be pressed to their chest, a cloth laid over their eyes, a prayer said again and again until the words became a whisper of breath. Pilgrimage, even for the mentally unwell, was sometimes the only treatment available. The walking, the change of place, the fresh air, the hope, those were the medicine. Not every treatment was kind. There were dark rooms. There were iron cuffs. There were cages, real and metaphorical, but often those who suffered were kept not in punishment, but in patience. A family might keep a mad son at home, fed and watched, allowed to roam the fields or sit by the fire, muttering, as long as he harmed no one. A woman who wept and would not stop might be taken to a convent, where the nuns would tend her with prayers and comb her hair and let her cry. The goal was not correction. It was containment, a hope that the storm would pass. And sometimes it did. The melancholy lifted, the visions faded. The speech returned to rhythm, and sometimes it didn't. But still, the person was fed, wrapped. They were not forgotten. There is a kind of beauty in that, a society with so few tools for healing, still finding ways to hold space for the suffering. The doctors wrote of strange remedies, cutting open a vein behind the ear, or feeding the patient the heart of a dove, dried and powdered. There were recipes that called for pearl dust, or wine steeped with rose petals, or ointments made from violets and sheep's brain. None of these cured the mind, but they showed that the mind mattered, that its pain was real, even if it could not be seen. There is a story of a man who believed he was made of glass. He would not sit down. For fear he would shatter, and so his caregivers padded a room for him, lined it with cushions and straw, and wool, and let him walk in circles for hours, never forcing him to stop, never calling him mad, just letting him be glass. Until one day, the story says, he sat and did not break. There is a lesson in that kind of care, in letting the world slow down for the person who cannot match its pace. The medieval world, for all its violence and fear, held strange, soft corners where people could simply be. where madness was not always something to be cured, but something to be witnessed. And so tonight you lie in one of those corners where the walls are thick, the fire burns low, and the scent of thyme and tallow hangs in the air. There is a gentle sound of singing down the corridor, not cheerful, but calm. And somewhere nearby, someone pours water into a bowl over and over, as if washing away fear. You are not mad, or maybe you are, but no one here will judge you for that. Your thoughts may twist and wander. Your mind may echo or stutter, but your body is warm. Your limbs are held. And your breath moves in and out like a tide that knows. No shame. Rest now. Let the walls hold you. Let the woolen blankets press you back into yourself. Let the music drift past your ears like birdsong heard through a heavy fog. The world is still turning, but you are safe. You are known. And if madness is here, it is quiet now. Tomorrow may bring questions. But tonight there's only rest. Quiet recovery, or not recovery in the medieval world was not a moment. It was not a bell that rang or a chart that turned green or a list of symptoms that vanished in the night. Recovery was a slow, uncertain drift, a dim flicker of strength where once there was only stillness, a slightly stronger breath, a clearer look in the eyes, a spoonful of broth no longer refused. It came in small, nearly invisible increments, wrapped in wool and silence and the steady repetition of familiar things. You might wake one morning and feel, quite suddenly, less cold than before, and that would be something. Or you might not wake at all, and that too was understood, not with drama or panic, but with a sigh and a prayer and the quiet folding of linens. You lie now in a room that does not ask anything from you. The stone walls are pale in the light of a candle, stub, flickering just enough to catch the glint of brass at the corner of a basin, or the dull shimmer of wax linen folded at your feet. You have been here for many days or perhaps weeks. Time in the infirmary stretches and folds like soft dough. 1 hour blends gently into the next. Meals are given at intervals you no longer measure. A woman with a veil checks your pulse in. The mornings, always with the same fingers, the same war rosary tucked into the sleeve of her robe. She never rushes. She does not speak much, but her presence is steady, and that has come to mean more than words. They have stopped treating you with poultices now. The cloth wraps are fresh, but the herbs are gone. You are no longer a wound in need of battle. You are a body in need of rest. You are propped up with pillows now. They smell faintly of hay, and something bitter, like wormwood or old wood smoke. The window has been cracked just slightly to let in a thin ribbon of cool morning air. You watch it sometimes, the breeze moving the edge of the curtain, the sound of a distant cart, the cry of a bird you do not recognize. These too are part of healing. You are not spoken to of progress. No one tells you you are getting better. But they keep feeding you. They keep washing your feet. They keep adjusting the fire or the blankets or the cloth at your brow, as if they believe, quietly and without announcement, that you will still be here tomorrow. Some are not. You've seen the quiet way a bed is stripped, how the body is taken without rush or noise, how the space is cleaned and left bare until another arrives. No one cries loudly, but sometimes you hear a prayer murmured from the corridor, and it slips under the door like incense. Death is not a surprise here. It is not a failure. It is just a visitor who comes or does not, and who's met either way with the same soft patience. You are not afraid of it now. Not quite. There is a kind of peace in knowing the people around you have seen it before, that your breath is not their first to watch, nor will it be their last. If it falters, they will tend to you. If it steadies, they will tend to you. In the afternoon, you are helped to sit by the hearth. Not far, just a few steps. Wrapped in a shawl, your hand guided beneath another's arm. It is a ceremony without ceremony, a return to vertical life. You sit on a stool and feel the warmth of the fire against your shins. Someone hands you a cup of weak ale, and you take it. And though it tastes of wood and dust and barley, It feels like an achievement. Around you, others do the same. A man with a bandaged leg stares into the coals. A child with a cough wrapped in layers of linen, her eyes closed, but breathing gently. No one speaks unless they must. Conversation is not discouraged, but it's not expected. This is not the kind of place where laughter comes easily, but neither is it absent. Sometimes a soft chuckle from a corner, a murmured joke between sisters, a story retold for the third time that still makes someone smile. It's not joy exactly, but it's not sorrow either. It's something in between, a quiet endurance, a fragile peace. You feel it most at night when the candles are snuffed one by one and the air grows heavy with sleep. The others in the room breathe deeply or murmur softly or cough once and then go still. Someone's beads clink against wood. Someone else mutters a final prayer. The rhythm of so many sleepers forms a kind of lullaby, not sung, but lived. A blanket is tucked more tightly around your feet. A hand smooths your hair and then withdraws. The fire is banked low. The darkness is not empty. It holds you. You remember dimly what it felt like to be outside of this place. The noise, the cold, the hunger, the confusion. You remember the ache that brought you here, though it no longer feels sharp. Now it is just a quiet echo, like the memory of a storm long past. You do not know if you will leave here tomorrow, or in a week, or at all. No one does. But every day you remain, you are treated like someone who still lives, someone worth tending. There is something profound in that, even if it is never said aloud. The treatments may have been strange, the boiled herbs, the wine poured over wounds, the leeches and the poultices and the humming of prayers through closed doors, but the care was always real. The people who held your arms steady during bleeding, who stirred beeswax into oil by firelight, who examined your urine with squinting eyes and solemn nods, they did not always understand the body, but they understood how to stay near it, how to keep it warm, how to show up again and again and again, even when healing was uncertain or impossible. And perhaps that is the strangest thing of all. Not the skull drilling, not the frog bone potions, not the stargazing physicians with their ink-stained charts, but the fact that so much of it was done slowly, patiently, humanely. You may leave this place with scars, with stiffness, with a limp, with some strange remedies still staining your skin, but you leave it having been watched and wrapped and witnessed. And maybe that is the best kind of recovery one can hope for as you shift now in your bed. The blanket, rough and warm, moves with you. The hearth glows faintly across the room. Somewhere a basin is being emptied, the slow trickle of water against stone. A fresh bundle of herbs hangs drying above the fire. The nun with the quiet step passes once more, her hand brushing the doorframe. You are not fully well. You may never be, but you are alive, and that in this world is enough. The bells will ring tomorrow. The cockerel will crow. The world will go on. But tonight you are here, tended, wrapped, and deeply, utterly still.